In its final season, the good doctor tries to end things on a high note, but continues to commit to its many flaws or trip ups as it pursues trying to leave a lasting impression. So, to summarize the final season, the good doctor both looks toward the past and also to its future. For both a new medical student named Charlie, who is someone on the autism spectrum like Sean, we're reminded how far Sean has come, but also reminded about the privileges that have allowed him to get to this point. Alongside that, we have Sean trying to raise a child with Leah, who he bumps heads with, especially over the idea of potentially testing Steve for autism. And outside of Sean, Dr. Lim finds herself thrust into a leadership position she doesn't enjoy. Morgan and Alex continue to be an odd couple. And when it comes to Dr. Glassman, as Sean makes it clear that he doesn't need Dr. Glassman as much as he wants him in his life, as he's done since season 1, Dr. Glassman begins to shift and then latch on to someone named Hannah, who's an addict who seemingly is meant to help him do his final act of atonement regarding what he allowed happen to Maddie that caused her death. So getting to the highlights, really for us, the only highlight was Hannah, and granted, there's a need to recognize the nepotism here because Ruby Kelly, who played Hannah, is another person of Richard Schiff, who plays Dr. Glassman's family. But let me say, unlike when his wife was on the show, no offense to her, you actually get something out of Hannah, and his scenes with his daughters have the type of impact and chemistry that we didn't see when he was acting with his wife. And yes, part of it is because he invokes Maddie's name, and all that happened with her is definitely something that can get you in your feelings because of what has been built up to this point. But in this season, I feel like the guest stars, we kind of got a glimpse or else a reminder of how good things used to be in season 1. And while Claire got to do her thing, Hannah, I feel, really allowed us to get something from Dr. Glassman that he hasn't gotten from any actively on Sean for a while. For Hannah wasn't a love interest. She was a patient, but she's not fully related to his work. So with that, she's something separate. And this allowed us to get passion, tears, a good back and forth. And even when it comes to Hannah's conversation with Sean, which I think we clipped on our second channel, you get something that actually felt heartfelt and emotional without feeling kind of cheesy in a way or else forced. And with that, it's probably one of the few genuine moments that came from season 7 that didn't feel like it was for shock value. With that said, the low point, which I don't think I've said in a while for a review, is that when it came to season 7, it killed off a character and it had a character seemingly just to get people talking. And in some ways, I get for the character they killed off, maybe that was supposed to deal with messaging, considering the times that we're in and what's going on in the world. But to follow it up with how it hurts another character and where they have to have their arm cut off, as we noted in the season finale, sometimes you can feel that anyone that gets in Sean's way or could potentially be some type of rival, they do something to them. Whether it's Morgan losing the ability to do surgery, or what happens to the person who had to get their arm cut off, they do something to make sure that when it comes to where we see Sean end up at the end of this series, that person could not be considered somebody who could be in competition with him for the same position. Getting to the on the fence portion, Charlie is a character who I feel like the show needed, yet at the same time I feel like came too late. For in many ways, Charlie is necessary for us. She gives you an idea of what could be when you don't have the privileges that Sean had. She's somebody that's autistic who gets on people's nerves, has little things about her which aren't neurotypical that can cause different type of conflicts. And because she doesn't have a Dr. Glassman, because she doesn't have all of her peers kind of corralling around her to protect her, you can see that the only way that she could have any type of defense is claiming disability discrimination. And with that, unfortunately, you don't get to see all that play out because this is the final season. It's almost like when it comes to casting Charlie, it's a means of trying to not course correct, but there is a writer named Sarah Kuchak who writes for Time.com, and she has an article which basically breaks down why The Good Doctor was not one of their favorite shows. And and this might be surprising, the consultant about people with autism not being autistic, the writer's room not having a person with autism, and pretty much outside of like one or two patients, there wasn't actors who had autism. Charlie's introduction, while long overdue, is also something that unfortunately doesn't get the type of development it required for all of Sean and Charlie's issues and butting heads. It pretty much comes to a halt like midway through the season. And on top of that, unfortunately, Charlie doesn't get to evolve beyond being somebody who has autism and how that affects the workplace. She doesn't get what Sean had, where, they got to see or know about her childhood. Because it's such a short amount of time, we don't see her get into a relationship. We don't really get to see her develop friendships much. And granted, while The Good Doctor sucks at creating relationships, at the same time, the point is, she doesn't get to evolve beyond that initial hook. And it just makes it feel like she's shoehorned in here to almost address a long-held criticism of the show. Speaking of how bad relationships are, I get that with medical dramas and the idea that the medical field has it where people are so dedicated to being at the hospital that where else are they going to date or find people? But even with that in mind, a part of me is like, I get why you have to have relationships, but can somebody just admit that this show's not good at it and they just kind of sidestep that, or even have relationships purely off camera? Because, bringing up Alex and Morgan, they continue to be the kind of couple that maybe makes sense on the inside, but from the outside looking in, they don't. And to me, part of the reason for that is, especially this season, I started to wonder maybe Morgan is not neurotypical, and because of the way Alex treats her, maybe he's trying to force her into a neurotypical mindset, and that's why a lot of their relationship just seems like it's always button heads. And then I would even add in, when it comes to Leah and Sean, a part of me is never going to forget how Leah was acting towards Sean, especially early on. And I feel like with the idea that Steve might be autistic, that didn't trigger worries and fears of Leah in terms of raising an autistic child, but because she has made Sean an exception. She still holds her prejudices, her stereotypes, but for Sean, she feels like he's an exception to all that she has learned or whatever she saw in media. And because she's now going to have to potentially raise somebody with autism and really be part of it, something's different there, and that leads to issues that I feel like the show kind of sidesteps rather than really dives into. Because it's always different between being with somebody or knowing somebody who has autism, gay, trans, whatever, versus raising somebody that is autistic, gay, trans, or what have you. And really, let's not forget that Jared and Jordan, they tried to push together. Claire comes back into the picture, so they try to push her with Jared. And overall, the only good relationship they really had on this show, and we saw what they did with that, was Asher and Jared. And yeah, which leads to the next on the fence topic, which is Dom. And I don't know what exactly was the point of Dom. He comes in, he has a fear or phobia of blood. He talks about opening up a clinic with his brother, who we don't meet, don't really learn much about. And it's like Dom started as an idea, but between the writer's strike and time constraints, that idea got swept aside. And ultimately, it was just about, hey, Dr. Andrews is gone. We don't have any black male doctors on here. Let's just put Dom into that place in order to check off our diversity box. Which leads to the last on the fence topic, and that's just Dr. Lim. Dr. Lim has been on this show since the beginning, and unfortunately, she did not get a proper send-off. Yes, her mom did show up but she had to share her mind with Dr. Glassman, who got yet another storyline to remind us that people find him sexually attractive. And this isn't to say anything against the actor, but my thing is, when it comes to this show, Dr. Lim got the worst kind of stories. Either she got thrown into a relationship because there was nothing better for her to do, or they threw her into some kind of trauma, which, whether you want to talk about getting stabbed, or you want to talk about her getting put in a wheelchair, the storylines eventually got swept under the rug. Dr. Lim might have been put in a wheelchair, and they kind of explored that, but by this season, you wouldn't even know that she had any type of issues because Sean found a miraculous cure. And it really just shows between what we see for Sean, Dr. Glassman, and others, this show often played its favorites, and while Dr. Lim has always had a place on this show, she never got the spotlight. She never got the worthy storyline that she deserved. And unfortunately, even in the final season, they don't do right by the character or the actress. Overall, when it comes to The Good Doctor, it's one of the longest shows we've covered from start to finish, especially when you consider the episode count. And even though we spent so much time with it, I don't find the ending bittersweet whatsoever. If anything, it feels overdue, and while Season 7 presented Charlie and Hannah, who gave the show something it needed, unfortunately, between the romances and the push for shock value, The Good Doctor ultimately became what so many shows like it have, in terms of it didn't know what to do once its initial hook lost its luster, yet it was still popular. So it kept going on even as it ran out of things to say, even as it ran out of good storylines, and even as it became clear that a lot of the characters, they knew they couldn't just kill off everybody, so instead they just had them trudge on in the background. And ultimately, as shown by Dr. Lim, while it's good that the actors collected a paycheck, I can't say that this show really did anything to push the idea that it's going to be easy for them to find their next program, whether it's on television or on movie.